We're going to be going over Chapter 4, the global aspect, as far as how to manage if you're going to be managing companies that deal in international and global types of products and services, some of the things to be thinking about that go along with that. The world is shrinking. What's happening is because of uh, electronics, because of technology, because of air travel, a lot of things are going overseas, primarily because of cost. And what's happening is there's more and more opportunities and challenges that go along with going much more global or international. A lot of e-commerce is being done today internationally. For example, a lot of sales are actually happening overseas. Because of the technology, because of the internet, we're able to connect a lot of companies with people that may be in countries completely, totally different from your own. There are a lot of positive and negative effects that go along with it. Positive, you're getting reduced cost as far as your labor is concerned, and you're getting more affordable products because of those reduced costs. Downside, there are a lot of companies that are becoming very dependent on certain countries. If that one country starts having troubles, there could be challenges as far as the company getting the products and the supplies that they need. There's a lot of mergers and things that are going on across country lines. For example, Budweiser, the king of beers, produced by Anheuser-Busch, is actually owned now by AB InBev out of Belgium. Chrysler Automotive is actually owned primarily by the Italian firm Fiat. It's now Fiat Chrysler. So there's a lot of mergers and acquisitions that are going on overseas and here in the United States. You have multinational corporations and organizations. A corporation, multinational corporation, is a firm that has operations for profit in multiple countries. Multinational organization is more of a nonprofit organization that is operating in several countries. You need to learn about international management somehow, some way, because you may be dealing with foreign customers or partners. You may be dealing with suppliers who are overseas and needing to learn how to work with them. Or you might work for an American firm outside of the United States. One of the problems that we have here in the United States is the way we're seen by people overseas. A lot of countries and their population consider the United States more arrogant, loud, and uninterested in the world. Before I started traveling overseas for my job when I was at the pharmaceutical company, I had a great mentor that helped me with this. He explained to me that, yes, we have these courses that, okay, the French do this, the Germans do this, that sort of thing. He said, you're actually dealing with individuals. Those courses and those ideas will give you some direction as far as overall what the culture is like. The thing is, you're dealing with individuals, and no one individual is going to be the typical French or the typical German. Just like here in the United States, it's not the typical American. And so he explained to me, step back, listen, and see what it is that's actually going on. Learn what appropriate behavior is. For example, there are some hand gestures that we use here in the United States that is considered rude in other countries. Learn the various rituals and learn something about the language. One of the things I found was when you're going to a country where the people there don't speak English as well as some of the others, you better learn something about their language if you want respect, if you want to be dealt with very well. You have managers who may be ethnocentric or polycentric. In other words, ethnocentric. Many times we here in the United States think everybody should be like us and should act like us. For example, Chevrolet made a huge mistake. Back in the 70s, one of the primary, the main seller cars that they had was the Nova, the Chevy Nova. Chevrolet decided to start exporting those Novas to Spanish-speaking countries. Now, the thing is, it was an absolute flop. The reason is because Nova in Spanish means no go. Who wants to buy a car that's called a no go? A polycentric manager is somebody who takes the native manager's view. All right. What we need are more geocentric managers. In other words, managers who can see similarities and differences between both the home and the foreign personnel and countries and companies that they're dealing with. The reason why companies tend to expand internationally is primarily because of labor. All right. You also have availability of supplies and markets and things like that. The main thing is labor costs. You can expand internationally various ways. The one that has the lowest risk is global outsourcing. So, for example, do you realize that there are no T-shirts made here in the United States? All T-shirts that we have here in the United States are actually made overseas. China, Bangladesh, Vietnam are main suppliers of T-shirts to us. So you can import or export. You can also do some licensing. And the higher up this way you go, the highest the risk is. Joint ventures and then also wholly owned subs. So outsourcing is basically having suppliers provide the labor and the goods for you. Importing is just buying the stuff that you need. Exporting is where you make your stuff and then you send them outside. Licensing is where you make an agreement with another company where you might sell each other's products. A franchise is where you're actually selling a portion of you're selling to someone something that they can do for your company. For example, McDonald's has done quite a bit franchising overseas. Joint ventures are where you are getting together with somebody else and selling each other stuff. And then wholly owned subsidiaries is basically where you're saying, okay, we are buying this organization and we are going to be doing business in that country as this organization. For example, Budweiser is actually a wholly owned subsidiary of AB InBev. There are barriers to trade. So, for example, you have tariffs or taxes. In other words, on certain goods that are coming into the United States has taxes that that country needs to pay. Other countries have the same issue. In other words, anything that we ship to China, there's going to be taxes or tariffs that the United States has to pay the Chinese. The whole idea behind that is to protect the industries that make that stuff within the country where the import is coming in. There may be quotas. In other words, you can only submit or ship so many to a country. Embargoes is where you completely stop any kind of trade with another country. Sanctions is where you say, okay, this country over here, now we are not going to do any kind of trade with country A. You are country B. If you try to trade with country A, we're not going to trade with you. There are various organizations that help international trade. First of all, the World Trade Organization, which basically has tried to monitor and enforce any of the trade agreements that have been set by various countries. You have the World Bank, which provides loans for developing nations to try to get some of those industries and companies coming into their country. Then you have the International Monetary Fund, which is kind of a lender of last resort for countries that are suffering from that unfavorable balance of payment. So, for example, they are constantly importing more than they are exporting, and they need to be able to finance the importation of those goods. There are various trading blocks which help with trade between various countries. The thing is, many of these trading blocks are in trouble at this point in time. NAFTA, which is kind of in trouble right now as far as the trying to be replaced by the current administration. The European Union is kind of in trouble right now because there's some squabbling between the various countries as far as some of the things that are going on, what's being traded. Exchange rates also impact your international trade and the things that you're doing. Currencies will never be a one-to-one. There's always one currency that's stronger than another. And so one of the things you have to think about is when you're dealing with international trade, what's happening with the various currencies? Are things getting more expensive for us or less? There's also the 5 major emerging economies, the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. What's happening is they are a huge amount of the global population, and they are actually rising as far as some of the things that they are producing and providing to other countries. We also have to be aware of the culture of the country that we're going to be doing business with. For example, tipping. Here in the United States, we might tip 18%, 15%, 20% at a meal. In Germany, that's considered rude. If you're going to tip, it's typically maybe 5%. A lot of the service charges are already built into the bill, and being a waiter, being a server like that is considered more of a career. Consequently, if you want to leave a small tip, you do, but you pay it directly to the server. You don't just leave it on the table, or you tip it to the bill. We also have to think about different context as far as the cultures are concerned. You have your low context culture, which is primarily focusing more on the words. Then you have the low context culture, which is looking for situational cues for what's actually happening as far as our communication is concerned. One of the things I suggest is go back to the text and look over the information as far as the Globe Project, as far as the various dimensions and what they mean. Other cultural variations, things to take into consideration, language, all right, really can get in the way. It can also be very useful if you start to learn some of it. For example, I have been very fortunate in my career to have traveled internationally. I have traveled internationally and done business in Canada, in France, Germany, and Switzerland, Singapore, Israel. So I have a lot of stamps on my passport. One of the things that I learned was in doing some business for a particular project, the people I was dealing with in France were not as fluent in English. So I spent actually a couple of months really trying to brush up on my French so I could at least converse at a basic level with those that I was dealing with. When I was finished with the project and leaving, they told me that they were very appreciative of my effort to learn the language because nobody else had done the same. Another thing to think about is our space, how we use space. Here in the United States, we typically have face-to-face conversations at around 3 feet or so, basically arm's length. Depending on where you go internationally, in Asia, it may be further apart. In Mediterranean countries, it may be closer together. So one of the things to think about is how do these various cultures take into account use of interpersonal space? Time orientation, religion, make sure you understand the laws. Before going to Singapore, I realized and learned the laws, you better not be chewing gum, because if you chew gum and you throw it on the sidewalk, you can be arrested and possibly caned. That's just the way it is. American managers who go overseas are considered expats, expatriates. In other words, if you take some time, you're on a project and you are living and working in a foreign country. And one of the things that happens many times when expats come back from wherever they're at to the United States, a lot of them go to another company because of their experience. When you start thinking about your career and being much more globally minded, Things to do: listen, observe. Listen and observe to what it is that's actually going on around you when you go to another country. Be aware of the context. Try to get an understanding as far as the context that's used in their communications. And then choose something choose something that's basic. In other words, small efforts in showing respect can really help as far as your effectiveness as a manager in dealing with folks overseas. Those are some of the key points from the chapter. If you have questions, let me know.